In the natural world, there seems to be an unwritten rule. Life beneath the waves is usually more terrifying than anything found on dry land. Even today, oceans hold mysteries and monsters that can inspire more fear than predators on the surface. And in the distant past, this pattern was even stronger. During the age of the dinosaurs, for example, some of the most dreadful creatures on Earth weren't the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex or the agile raptors that stalked the land, but the enormous reptiles that patrolled the seas. Creatures like Mosasaurus or Liopleurodon. It is hard to imagine a time in Earth's history when venturing into the water would have been safer than staying on land. Yet if we travel far enough back, deep into prehistory, there was one brief chapter where the ocean truly was the safer option. This strange and unsettling moment unfolded during the Lopingian epoch, the final stage of the Permian period, stretching from about 259 to 251 million years ago. The Lopingian directly preceded the Triassic period and is often referred to as the Late Permian. The Earth of that time was almost unrecognizable compared to the world we know today. Even the rhythm of time itself was different. The moon orbited closer to our planet, which meant that a full day lasted only about 22 hours. The continents had fused into a colossal supercontinent known as Pangaea. This landmass was immense, binding together what we now call Africa, the Americas, India, Antarctica, Australia, and parts of Europe into one continuous stretch. Not every piece of land was part of Pangaea, however. A few regions escaped its grasp. Siberia, Kazakhstan, and northern China remained separate, while further south a fragmented island included what is now southern China and parts of Southeast Asia. Other isolated blocks, Turkey, Iran, Tibet, floated between two great seas, the Paleotethys Ocean and the Tethys Ocean. Yet even those vast waters seemed small next to Panthalassa, the largest ocean the planet has ever known. Panthalassa covered more than 60% of Earth's surface, dwarfing the modern Pacific Ocean by more than double. Imagine an ocean so vast that crossing it would feel like entering an endless void, a space of pure isolation. Its immensity alone was intimidating, but what made it unusual was that during the Lopingian, its waters were not filled with terrifying monsters. Instead, they were relatively calm. That is not to say there were no predators. Sharks had already been patrolling Earth's seas for nearly 200 million years. The Permian seas had once been home to Helicoprion, an 8-meter shark with a bizarre spiral of teeth in its lower jaw that looked like a buzzsaw. By the Lopingian, however, that terrifying lineage had already vanished. What remained were smaller relatives like Helicampodus, which rarely grew longer than 2 meters. Their teeth were adapted for soft-bodied prey like squid rather than armored fish or large marine reptiles. Other groups of sharks, like xenacanthids and hybodonts, still swam the seas, but most species were rarely longer than 1 meter. These were not the sea lords of nightmares. Even the once dominant eurypterids, ancient sea scorpions that in earlier ages had grown to enormous sizes, were now a shadow of their former selves. By the late Permian, only 2 small genera survived, far removed from the role of apex predator. Marine life in general was struggling. Just 2 million years earlier, during the Capetanian stage, a massive extinction event had ravaged Earth's oceans. Though less famous than the later Cretaceous extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, the Capetanian die-off had been catastrophic, devastating particularly marine ecosystems. The seas of the Lopingian were filled with survivors, not rulers, reduced trilobites, smaller ammonoids, scattered cephalopods, and weakened reefs. The oceans were far from thriving. But precisely because of this, they were strangely peaceful compared to what awaited anyone who set foot on land. On land, life had bounced back more quickly, but in ways that made it far more dangerous. The Capetanian extinction had eliminated many of the earlier dominant species, such as the dinocephalians, massive and diverse therapsids that had ruled as herbivores and predators during the Middle Permian. Their disappearance left a vacuum at the top of the food chain. And in nature, vacuums never remain empty for long. New predators rose to fill the gap. Among them, none were more fearsome than the gorgonopsids. Discovered by paleontologists in the late 19th century, their fossils were so striking that they were compared to the Gorgons of Greek mythology. These animals were therapsids, part of the synapsid lineage, the same branch of life that would eventually give rise to mammals. But they were not mammals themselves. Instead, they were strange, powerful beasts that dominated the late Permian. At first, Early gorgonopsids were small, barely longer than a human foot. They hunted reptiles and smaller therapsids. But over millions of years, evolution pushed them toward gigantism. By the late Permian, they had become apex predators unlike anything the Earth had seen before. The largest, known as Inostrancevia, reached lengths of more than 3.5 meters and weights over 450 kilograms, equivalent to a modern bear. Inostrancevia was a nightmare on 4 legs. Its skull was armed with saber-like canine teeth that stretched nearly 15 centimeters, among the longest ever recorded in a non-mammalian synapsid. These weren't just long, they were curved and serrated, designed to slice deep into flesh, sever blood vessels, and inflict catastrophic wounds. Behind the canines were long post-canine teeth that added to the destruction. Its body was just as formidable. Long, muscular limbs allowed it to sprint in short bursts, powerful enough to bring down massive prey. And it wasn't confined to one region. Fossil evidence shows that Inostrancevia roamed widely across what is now Russia, Asia, and Africa. From warm plains to cold deserts, it adapted and thrived, ruling as a universal terror. Scientists still debate its exact hunting strategy. Some suggest it used precision bites to the neck, much like the saber-toothed cats that would appear tens of millions of years later. Others believe it may have wounded its victims and then let them weaken from blood loss and shock before finishing them off. Either way, its weapons were brutally effective. Surviving in a landscape where Inostrancevia prowled would have been a constant battle for life. And as if one colossal predator weren't enough, the late Permian was filled with them. In South Africa, a distinct branch of gorgonopsids evolved independently into giants known as the rubigini. Though Inostrancevia holds the record for the largest individual gorgonopsid, the rubigini as a family were overall the biggest. Their skulls were massive, sometimes making up more than 15% of their total body length. Species like Rubigia atrox grew to 3 meters long, their heads thick and reinforced, adapted for tackling enormous herbivores. Interestingly, despite their terrifying appearance, their bite force wasn't especially strong, only a little stronger than that of a modern wolf. Instead, they relied on their serrated teeth, which acted like knives, slicing through flesh with efficiency. This specialization shows just how deadly the Permian arms race had become. Evolution was producing predators with razor-sharp precision weapons, each adapted to kill in its own gruesome way. The rubigini weren't solitary either. Evidence suggests they coexisted with multiple other large predators in the same regions, creating ecosystems packed with apex hunters. Imagine walking across the Permian landscape. At any moment, you might cross paths with not one but several saber-toothed beasts, each capable of tearing prey apart. Subscribe if you like the video. The gorgonopsids may have been the undisputed rulers of the land, but they weren't alone. The late Permian hosted a gallery of killers, each with its own evolutionary tricks. If you thought Inostrancevia and the rubigini were terrifying, the presence of other predators only made the surface world more dangerous than ever. Among these rivals were the therocephalians. Like the gorgonopsids, they were therapsids, part of the mammal lineage. But unlike their saber-toothed cousins, therocephalians came in a dizzying variety. Some were small and compact, with wide skulls and short bodies, suited to different hunting styles. Others experimented with bizarre adaptations. A few, such as Ichabengips and Euchaimbergia, may even have been venomous, the first vertebrates on land to evolve poison glands. Imagine a saber-toothed predator that not only bit you, but injected venom into your bloodstream. Their diversity allowed therocephalians to spread across the globe. Fossils have been found in Russia, China, Africa, and even Antarctica. Some species lived semi-aquatic lives, lurking in rivers and swamps. Others hunted on dry ground with saber-like teeth of their own. The largest, Mascarinus, was the size of a jaguar, but with a head closer in scale to a lion. Its long, conical teeth were built to crush and tear. Fossil evidence suggests it pinned prey down with its muscular forelimbs and then delivered devastating bites. In some ecosystems, Mascarinus may even have replaced the gorgonopsids as the apex predator, a rare case of a different lineage stealing the crown. But the biggest therocephalian of them all was Megawaitsia, which stalked European Russia during the early Lopingian. Reaching nearly 3 meters in length, this monster may have used venom to weaken its prey before delivering the killing blow. Coprolites, fossilized droppings, suggest it fed on large dicynodonts, perhaps immobilizing them with poison before dragging them down. If true, Megawaitsia would stand as one of the most advanced and horrifying predators of its age. And yet, even Megawaitsia was not the only threat. The late Permian saw the rise of the archosauriforms, early relatives of the crocodiles and dinosaurs that would later dominate the Mesozoic. These animals, though slimmer and more lightly built than their later descendants, were still formidable hunters. With long, thin teeth and semi-aquatic habits, they thrived in environments ranging from rivers to plains. Their adaptability allowed them to spread widely, foreshadowing the eventual takeover of their lineage in the Triassic. Another group, the Croniosuchids, looked like armored crocodiles. Heavy dorsal plates protected their backs, making them difficult targets even for saber-toothed killers. Most were the size of large lizards, but giants like Urolurpiton could grow as large as a modern crocodile. These armored beasts lurked near rivers and swamps, ambushing prey unlucky enough to stray too close. Amphibians, too, reached monstrous sizes. The temnospondyls, ancestors of modern amphibians, prowled rivers and lakes as if they were crocodiles. One of the most fearsome was Uranocentrodon, a 4-meter predator with the body of a salamander and the hunting style of an alligator. In Europe, its cousin Melosaurus filled a similar role, reaching 3 meters in length. These creatures were perfectly suited for ambush, waiting in the shallows before exploding upward to seize prey in their powerful jaws. Everywhere on land and in freshwater environments, predators reigned supreme. But it wasn't just carnivores. Herbivores had evolved their own defenses, creating a balance of terror where prey and predator alike were heavily armed. The dicynodonts were among the most successful herbivores of the time. Stocky, muscular, with tusks like a small pig, these creatures were tough survivors. One of the most iconic was Lystrosaurus. With powerful forelimbs and unique dentition, it likely dug burrows for protection. Fossil evidence suggests entire colonies lived underground, safe from the saber-toothed gorgonopsids above. Other herbivores turned their very bodies into armor. Parareptiles, especially the paraiosaurs, developed thick bony plates that turned them into walking fortresses. Scutosaurus, one of the largest, rivaled predators in both size and strength. Covered in armor and bristling with bony spikes, it was nearly unassailable. A gorgonopsid might still take one down, but not without risk of serious injury. Burrowers and fortresses weren't the only strategies. Some herbivores relied on sheer numbers. Fossils of dicynodont herds suggest they lived in large groups, using collective defense to survive in hostile environments. Safety came not from armor or tusks, but from community. Still, none of these defenses made land a safe place. For every prey species, there were predators ready to evolve sharper teeth, stronger limbs, or deadlier tactics. The arms race never stopped. Even the skies offered little threat, though in a very different way. Unlike the later Mesozoic, with its massive pterosaurs, the skies of the Permian were quiet. The largest flying animals were small gliders, the Weigeltosaurids, no bigger than bats. The true rulers of the air were insects, some massive by today's standards. Dragonflies the size of hawks buzzed above the swamps, though their dominance had waned since the collapse of the Carboniferous rainforests. But while the skies remained calm, the land grew ever more hostile. Temperatures during the late Permian soared. Average values reached 35 degrees Celsius, nearly double modern averages. Vast deserts stretched across the equatorial regions of Pangaea, while central mountains blocked rainfall, leaving huge swaths of land arid and lifeless. Habitable zones shrank, forcing animals into shrinking oases where predators gathered in terrifying density. If you were alive in the late Permian, your best chance of survival might have been to stay away from the land entirely. In the seas, predators were smaller, ecosystems weaker, and survival slightly easier. On land, every step brought you closer to saber-toothed gorgonopsids, venomous therocephalians, armored archosauriforms, and amphibians that lunged like crocodiles. It was a world where no place was truly safe. But the water, for once, might have been the lesser evil. And yet, even in this brutal environment, the Permian had not yet revealed its deadliest card. A catastrophe loomed, one that would make both land and sea almost uninhabitable. This was not just another extinction. It would be the worst disaster life on Earth had ever endured. The late Permian world was already brutal. On land, predators like Inostrancevia and Rubigia ruled with saber-toothed precision. Therocephalians and amphibians turned rivers and swamps into death traps. Herbivores either dug into the ground, built armor into their bodies, or banded together in desperate herds. The seas, by contrast, were strangely subdued. Sharks and cephalopods smaller than before, eurypterids reduced to shadows of their past, and reefs struggling to recover. For a rare moment in Earth's story, water seemed safer than land. But this fragile balance was about to shatter. Around 252 million years ago, the planet faced its deadliest crisis, the end Permian extinction, also known as the Great Dying. Nothing before or since has rivaled it. Even the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago pales in comparison. The culprit was fire from the depths of the Earth itself. In what is now Siberia, a chain of volcanic eruptions began unlike anything the planet had ever seen. For hundreds of thousands of years, lava poured from the ground, forming what geologists now call the Siberian Traps. These eruptions weren't like the occasional blasts we know today. They were apocalyptic floods of molten rock. In some places, the lava stacked nearly 1 kilometer thick, covering an area the size of modern Western Europe. But the lava alone wasn't what doomed life. The true killer was the atmosphere. These eruptions spewed colossal amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the skies. Global temperatures soared. Average values climbed to extremes hotter than nearly any other period in Earth's history. Poisonous gases choked the air, stripping oxygen from the environment. Breathing itself became difficult. At the same time, sulfur aerosols may have damaged the ozone layer, exposing the surface to punishing levels of ultraviolet radiation. Imagine living under a sun that burned your skin in minutes, with no shade strong enough to protect you. Plants withered, ecosystems collapsed, and the chain of life unraveled. The oceans, once a refuge, turned lethal. As the atmosphere flooded with carbon dioxide, the seas absorbed much of it. This caused acidification, dissolving shells and killing coral reefs. Water temperatures rose dramatically, stripping oxygen from the deep. Entire layers of the oceans became anoxic, dead zones where no fish or invertebrate could breathe. Hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas, may even have bubbled up from the depths, poisoning the air above. The results were catastrophic. Roughly 83% of genera vanished. More than half of all biological families were erased. Trilobites, which had survived for nearly 300 million years, disappeared forever. Eurypterids, once kings of the seas, were gone. Entire reef ecosystems collapsed and would not recover for millions of years. On land, the devastation was no less severe. Forests withered under the dual assault of heat and drought. Herbivores starved, and predators followed. The mighty gorgonopsids, the terrifying therocephalians, even the robust pariasaurs, one by one, they vanished. Whole lineages that had dominated for tens of millions of years were erased in the geological blink of an eye. The scale of the disaster is hard to comprehend. Imagine standing in a Permian valley as it happened. The ground rumbles with distant eruptions. Ash dims the sun. The air grows heavy with toxic gases, burning your lungs with every breath. Around you, plants shrivel. Herds of Lystrosaurus collapse in exhaustion, their burrows offering no escape. Predators stagger, their once dominant forms reduced to starving shadows. Streams dry, swamps rot, and lakes bubble with poison. It would have felt like the end of the world, because in many ways, it was. And yet, life clung on. A handful of survivors endured. Tiny burrowers, resilient dicynodonts like Lystrosaurus, and early archosauriforms managed to scrape through. In the seas, small fish, mollusks, and a few stubborn lineages of amphibians survived. These survivors would become the ancestors of the Triassic world, the stage on which the dinosaurs would later rise. But the cost was staggering. The Permian extinction reset life on Earth almost completely. Ecosystems were stripped bare, forcing evolution to start again with what little remained. For millions of years afterward, biodiversity was painfully low. The scars of the Great Dying shaped everything that followed. Looking back, the irony is striking. The late Permian was the only time in history when water was safer than land. And yet, when the Great Dying struck, the oceans turned into death traps even more lethal than the continents. Both realms became hostile beyond endurance. Survival wasn't about choosing sea over land, but about sheer luck and resilience. And that's the haunting truth. The balance between safety and danger, land and sea, is never permanent. The ocean may feel terrifying today, filled with sharks, giant squid, and deep-sea mysteries. But there was once a time when it was the gentler option, while the land crawled with saber-toothed predators and venomous killers. And then, in an instant, both realms collapsed into chaos, leaving only the faintest thread of life. It is a reminder of how fragile existence is. Dominant species, terrifying predators, armored herbivores, all can vanish in a single planetary catastrophe. What endures is not strength, but adaptability. The Permian survivors were not the biggest or the fiercest, but the ones that could endure change, hide in burrows, or adapt to poisoned air. From them, life rebuilt itself, and eventually, humans emerged to tell the story. So the next time you look at the ocean and fear what lurks beneath, remember the late Permian. Remember the time when the water was the safer choice, when the land was ruled by saber-toothed monsters, and when the greatest extinction of all nearly erased life itself. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video.